The streets we live in reveal the secret past beneath the skin of the present.
Here is our kitchen, which was the operating theatre of the hospital.
There were families that didn't have toilets, and there was many a visit to the drains in the middle of the night.
Our memories are rendered in the bricks and mortar that surround us.
Just behind you there was where we all danced.
Our streets chart momentous social change and the ebb and flow between enormous wealth and terrible poverty.
Pretty grim, isn't it? Dirt, filth, stench everywhere.
They reveal the changes that have shaped all our lives and make the story of our streets the story of us all.
It's a nice view, isn't it?
Duke Street, Glasgow, the longest street in Britain, running from the city centre to the tenement blocks of the East End. But just 40 years ago, many of the buildings that lined this street were under threat.
What are you going to do about it?
Knock them down.
This is the story of how a group of neighbours took on the might of the Glasgow Corporation in a battle to save their homes.
We're EastEnders. Forget your London EastEnders, we're the EastEnders, and we will fight to the death for what we believe in.
Glasgow, at the dawn of the 20th century, the heyday for the second city of the British Empire. Its shipyards, textile mills and heavy industry have made it the powerhouse of the Victorian and Edwardian age. Thousands are flocking to the city in search of work. Here on Duke Street, the road is lined with stone buildings filled with small flats. Tenements, Glasgow's solution for housing its Victorian workers close to their place of work. In 1968, Harriet Stromboli moved into her tenement that runs to the south of Duke Street.
And this is where I used to live, 47 Bathgate Street, 3 up, right at the top. I felt I had to get away from all the gossip that was going on at the time. Because at that time, it wasn't very common for women to leave their husbands and separate from their husbands, you know, so it was a kind of a... I was in a very bad position at the time. This brings back lots and lots of memories. When I used to have this twin pram. When you're bringing the children up, you left the pram in the stair, you brought one up, put him in his cot, run back down, got the other one, and brought her up and put her in her cot. Then you went down and you bumped the pram all the way up the 3 flights of stairs. So it wasn't easy when you had, especially a twin pram, to do this with. Because at the best of time, the stairs were always quite heavy to climb. But even worse now, I find it wasn't so bad when I was younger. But this is where I had to bump the pram right up till this was my door here. But then there was 2 doors. There was one there and one over at this side. The conditions for most people around here was overcrowding. That was the biggest problem, I think, in the area, was overcrowding.
Harriet's family of 6 was squeezed into a single room and kitchen, common at the time.
Such scenes as this are typical of the unsatisfactory conditions of thousands of people in Glasgow today.
So this is the little house I used to stay in with the children. This is the hall, and this was a toilet. And we didn't have a bathroom, it was just all toilet. And in here was our sitting room. And we used the sitting room as a bedroom as well. These couple came to my house one night. My sister's friends, who lived in all big houses in England, nice big houses. First thing they asked when they seen the house, where are your bedrooms? And I said, well, I don't have any bedrooms. And they kind of stopped talking and looked at each other and went, no bedrooms? How can you have a house without bedrooms? Where do you sleep? So I showed them. We sleep in this couch that pulls down into a bed in the sitting room. In here was a kitchen. And this was exactly the size of the kitchen. Alcove here. This wasn't a door or there was no facing on it. It was just a big alcove. And in here was 2 bunk beds and a single pull-down bed that my oldest son slept in. They kept talking about it. Even when they went back home, they sent me a letter and said how sorry they were for me that I didn't have a house with bedrooms. But I mean, it didn't bother me, but it really upset this couple that I didn't have any bedrooms in this house, you know. You were sleeping, you were eating, and you were cooking all in the one room. So it wasn't an easy task, but we did it very well, as best we could anyway. So it was a very small house.
Harriet's room and kitchen was just one of 1,500 flats in an area now called Reedvale. The map from 1884 reveals row upon row of newly built tenement blocks. They extend across 9 streets running south of Duke Street. It was a respectable working-class neighbourhood, and the people of the tenements made this street the bustling and thriving heart of the East End.
Duke Street was always busy then because that's where everybody done their shopping. So everybody on a Saturday afternoon was in Duke Street. I mean, it was always busy, bustly, you know, having to walk 3 ways to get by people.
Duke Street had everything you really wanted, from hat shops to children's shops, you know, they had men's shops, they had the Gold's, the wool shop.
There was Massey's, Curly's, Henry Healy's.
They had bakers, they had butchers.
Little folk, it was more for the people with money. I mean, you're in there if you had a lot of money. I shopped in Bobby's for my children's clothes because I couldn't have afforded to go anywhere else.
This one's probably a good one, which kind of shows, obviously, the number 53 here, and that's myself, my twin brother, my Aunt June, my gran and my grandpa.
Paul Cowan came to live on Bathgate Street when he was 4 years old. His grandfather, John Butterley, had raised his family of 3 daughters just along the street from Harriet Stromboli and her family.
So how many of us lived here?
In this one flat, there would have been 7 of us. My gran, my grandpa, my mum, my aunt, and the 3 of us. That was my grand-grandpa's bedroom, from memory. They were the only 2 in there, and everybody else was crammed into the other room. So there was a bunk bed with myself and my twin brother and my older brother, and then there was a double bed which had my mum and my Auntie June in it.
John and his wife were home movie enthusiasts. It's a unique record of Duke Street's tenement life, capturing family and neighbours in the closes and back courts in the late 1960s and 1970s.
We would hang about in here in the summers and stuff with them, and it was just always a nice garden. Always helped my grandpa with the gardening and stuff like that as well, and just kind of try and be around about him more than anything else.
And Paul appears in the film with his brothers. He's here wearing a white top.
I loved living here. I loved it, absolutely loved it. The people were brilliant. It was a community. You lived with other families up the close or across the street, or you know, there was maybe 5 or 6 families, all with kids the same age, and we all just ran about together.
There was always children out playing and people standing talking at closes, and it was a community street, I would say. Everybody seemed to know each other. This is Prince and this is Vicky. These are my twins. It was a happy house.
Oh, very good.
Very happy house. Though it was overcrowded by...
We didn't know any different at that time. We were all kids and it was just like one big playground to us.
That's right. I used to go to the window when they were out playing to call them up for dinner and things, and I used to shout, well, whoever it was out playing, but I used to shout, Diane, up, come up for dinner's ready. Vicky, come up, dinner's ready. Prince, come up, dinner's ready. So one of my friends used to think I had quite a lot of children and a dog.
In 1965, the Glasgow Herald reported that 40% of Glasgow's housing stock still had no plumbed bath or shower. 20% had no inside toilet. 40% had no hot water supply. 10 years later, this lack of the most basic amenities was still the norm in Duke Street.
When they went to school at first, and they were tiny little children, we as children was at school, even the teachers thought I only had dressed them up because their big sister was going to school, you know, but they were actually starting the school. And teachers were going, my God, we've never had such small children, you know. But it ended up...
We were midgets.
Not quite so.
Glasgow town planners had historically linked poor housing to poor health, high infant mortality, rickets, malnutrition, typhus and cholera.
In the one room or single end of the poorer district, the height and weight of boys of 10 years was found to be 3 feet 11 and 52 pounds. In two-room houses, 4 feet 1 and 56 pounds. And in three-room houses, 4 feet 2 and 59 pounds.
Glasgow Corporation was saying Harriet's children were small because her flat was overcrowded.
I remember the sink over at the window. That's where we used to get bathed every Sunday night. That was our ritual, wasn't it? It used to be terrifying.
I didn't think it was to use, but I did learn that later. They used to be frightened sitting in the sink. You know?
I was just terrified that people looking up and seeing little kids in the kitchen sink.
Getting washed. But that's how everybody did
That's what it was like.
That's what it was like.
Duke Street may have been overcrowded, but it wasn't a slum. Evidence of its respectable working-class origins are still seen. The public baths were a gift to the local population from a wealthy benefactor.
Once a week, walk down this road with my pram with all the washing in it, and we came here to do the weekly wash.
Luxurious for their time, they boasted a Turkish bath, a gymnasium and a reading room, as well as the public baths and wash house known as the Steamy.
But in that one main building was a Steamy, was the most important thing. It was called the Steamy because everybody came here to do their washing that didn't have washing machines in the days. Because it got you out for a wee while as well, you know, and then you met people and had a good blather as well, so. Moaning about their husbands, which was the biggest thing, I think, to go on in the Steamy was you talked about, you know, your life, you know, and the kids and your husbands, and just like they moaned about you when they were in the pub. We didn't go to the pub, we went to the Steamy. It was a nice place to come to. I liked the Steamy, it was good. My friend Anne Lowry always came with me. She'd have her pram and her wains, and me with my pram and my wains. Though I only used to bring one child, still wasn't at school, so Mario was the one I used to bring to the Steamy. He doesn't remember ever coming to the Steamy either. He does say, I think, Mum, you put the washing in the pram and made me walk. I said, probably I did, son, because I only had one pram, you know.
The Whitevale Baths and Wash House finally closed its doors in 1988. Unsafe and disused, it was partly demolished in 2012, but what remains is now listed.
If I won the lottery, I would buy this building because I think it is a most lovely building going to waste, and I would convert it into something for our area. It would do benefit to the people of Reedville. I would definitely buy this building if I won money.
This fine Victorian building, made of marble, stone and brick, with its reading rooms and luxurious baths, was built for an area with aspirations, because at the time, there were high hopes for Duke Street. In 1891, one of the most extraordinary events was to play out along this street.
Monday, the 26th of October in the afternoon, 3 specially commissioned trains arrived just over here, bringing Buffalo Bill's Wild West to Denniston. They brought with them several hundred horses. They brought one Texas steer, 4 cows and a herd of 18 buffalo, which were all herded up the street. Now, obviously you don't want a buffalo stampede on Duke Street. And I believe that the cowboys rode in a square around them to keep the buffalo moving.
Buffalo Bill moved on to the site of the previous year's East End exhibition, held at an old reform school just up the hill from Duke Street.
Well, that is Colonel W.F. Cody, otherwise known as Buffalo Bill. Yeah, the first show on the evening of Monday, the 16th of November, only played to 6,000 people, so there were obviously tickets available. By the time word got round, that first Saturday they were turning people away.
The show played to a packed house over 3 months. More than 600,000 people came to see Buffalo Bill and his Indians. More than the entire population of Glasgow.
Don't fall into the misconception that these guys, these Indians, were just actors made up to look like Indians. These guys were the real deal. There was about 50 or so of them. The majority of them enlisted voluntarily, but 17 of them were prisoners of war from the trouble which erupted the previous winter. The government didn't really know what to do with them. So Buffalo Bill came along and said, look, why don't I take these guys to Europe? Because this was actually an old trick going back to colonial times. If you had hostile Indians, you take them back east and say, look, the white man's world, the world that we will see to you is massive. You can't fight us.
The people of Duke Street came face to face with another world when they met real-life Native Americans.
The show was based up there. And of course, you get the Indians during their time off. They come promenading down and onto Duke Street. At first, it was obviously a very intimidating sight, a very novel sight, exotic sight for the local people. You didn't have immigrants then, but all of a sudden you have this encampment of Sioux Indians. You know, it's all a bit mad, but I think people got quite blasé. It just became part of the scenery after a while.
Buffalo Bill had come to Duke Street because it was the centre of a heaving metropolis. He was proved right, as thousands came every night to see his show. His wagon train finally departed Duke Street on the 27th of February 1892. This was a period of rapid expansion for the city and the industrial working class. Labourers and artisans migrated from the Highlands and over from Ireland to work in the shipyards, steelworks and factories. Glasgow was one of the fastest growing cities in the world. The population quadrupled between 1800 and 1850. Between 1850 and 1925, it quadrupled again to peak at 1,100,000. Twice the rate that London was expanding in the same period. And its housing strained under this relentless demand. In Duke Street, the tenements had all been built, and they were full to bursting. In 1950, Glasgow was Britain's most densely populated city. Its stone tenements had become a symbol for poverty, disease, crime, and overcrowding on a daunting scale.
So you've come to Glasgow, have you? Pretty grim, isn't it? Dirt, filth, stench everywhere. And believe me, there are literally hundreds of back courts, every bit as bad as this in Glasgow.
We were living in the slums, rat infested. I remember looking out the window and watching rats climbing out the midgie bins and rats running about the closes. I was fearing I got my clothes one day because there were big rats sitting there.
John Mallon was a child living in an area called the Gallowgate, to the south of Duke Street.
If you walk through the tenements in Glasgow, you walked in a maze because you're so small and the buildings were so high. And it just seemed to be a corner after a corner.
As Britain moved into the post-war world with high hopes, the Glasgow Corporation was determined that something had to be done. Their approach was as radical as it proved controversial.
There's Glasgow, 40,000 acres. And this small patch represents 2,000 acres. And on that is crammed 150,000 of the city's dwellings. That is, half the dwellings on a 20th of the space.
But that's ridiculous.
Of course it is.
What are you going to do about it?
Knock them down.
Slum dwellings, starting in the Gorbals area, were compulsory purchased by Glasgow Corporation and then razed to the ground to make way for their vision of the future.
Glasgow Today takes a look into tomorrow as the corporation puts on an exhibition foreshadowing the proposed new inner core of the city. A scale model, 100th full size, shows the bold outline of the Glasgow to be in sharp contrast to the city that was.
The Bruce Report, published in 1945, recommended the wholesale destruction of the centre of Glasgow and the rebuilding of an entire city from scratch over a period of 50 years. That way, Glasgow would transform into a healthy and beautiful city. Although later watered down, it did become the blueprint for the complete demolition of vast swathes of tenement slum housing. The aim was to rehouse 250,000 people living in central Glasgow and move them out into new council estates built on the rural edge of the city.
We nearly moved because there was me, my mother, my father, my brother, and then my other brother. My mother was pregnant, my other brother, and we stayed in a one-bedroom house, so we had to move. And we got a house in Easterus.
John Mallon was 8 when his family were moved out to Easter House. It was one of the largest of the new estates, or schemes.
I loved it. That was my happy memory, sitting in the back, building a fire, sitting till 5 in the morning. I used to kid on my camping out and just sit at a fire all night. And so that was my hobbies, and they sort of like egg hunting and making swings and building dens and just being free. That's what Easter's was really about.
Sometimes it seems as if there are more removal vans in Glasgow than buses. At any rate, statistics show that every 5 to 10 minutes, somebody somewhere is moving house.
Tens of thousands of people were shipped out of the city and into the schemes. Brand new state-of-the-art housing was waiting for them, set in green fields with the promise of fresh air and a world away from the
dirt, filth, stench everywhere.
This was not a modern idea. The concept of a healthy life away from the dangerous, overcrowded city centre had been tried before, and it had taken place on Duke Street. This map allows us to go back 160 years to 1843. Glasgow is in the grip of a typhus epidemic. A Glaswegian doctor, Robert Perry, attempts to explain the spread of disease by linking it to crime, poverty, and overcrowding. He draws a colour-coded map of the city, and Duke Street appears on this map, part-coloured red, denoting high levels of disease. But Perry's map shows Duke Street to be a dividing line between factories to the south and the green fields and trees of the estate of James Denniston to the north, where there is no disease. 10 years later, his family would have a grand plan to create a new suburb of moral rectitude, clean living, God-fearing and alcohol-free.
The idea for the garden suburb was a pet idea of his. He wished to develop because he had a concern. He was a moral person, obviously, a concern about the health and the welfare of society at all levels.
His son, Alexander, engaged one of the city's finest architects, James Salmon, to plan a 200-acre estate of avenues, boulevards and parks, and gave it the family name, Denniston.
This was the first street built, and the villas here, I think, were the first on the estate. They were then connected up. Craig Park was started, then the idea of connecting them up with the various terraces was the next aspect.
I think one of the things that's quite important to understand this as a terrace in the context of Denniston is it was originally supposed to be terraces and boulevards. So, you know, we've actually got a complete one here.
John Tweed's 1872 Guide of Glasgow and the Clyde recommends the pleasant suburb of Denniston. It is well laid out and contains many fine villas and lodges.
This, I think, originally had some 7 or 8 manses in there. I know personally of 3 or 4 ministers, and I think there's still a minister living just along there.
The manse, or vicarage, is now the home of the Reverend Barbara Quigley.
I think this manse was built by James Salmon for a friend of his, so this has got kind of bells and whistles on it. It's got the curved staircase and the double arch there, which is, I think, rather stunning. But then this is my house, so I love it. It's got a lovely skylight there. Throws a lot of light into what would be a dark space. But when the rain starts, it's like river dance. I love this room. It's really, really great. It's got all this fantastic ceiling and cornicing and frieze. And of course, having your own access to what is essentially a private garden means that you've got a beautiful view. It explodes the myth of the image of the East End of Glasgow. It blows it wide open. It's a hidden gem.
Denniston wanted to attract the professional classes to his utopian vision: doctors, lawyers and ministers. But as the East End of Glasgow's industrial heartland grew, so did the factories and tenements expanding along Duke Street. Denniston's lower-class neighbours were proving a little too close for comfort.
This is originally a gated community, and at one point there seems to have been some type of sentinel post here, whereby it looks like it was manned. It's also had various different arrangements. It was scalloped and the posts have been moved, but that gives you an idea of the exclusivity of this area. As 2 main entrances, west of Craig's and Craig Park, were actually gated. You needed to have a reason to come in here.
Denniston's dream had been to manufacture an idealised community for the professional classes. 100 years later, Glasgow Corporation had the same vision, but for its more impoverished citizens.
I said, Mama, tell if you can how you come to be here. He said, I live in Easterhouse, I flitted there last year. Everybody's flitted out to Easterhouse last year. Everybody in the world has flitted out to here. There's everyone you know, Uncle Joe and Ikey Mo, all flitted out to Easterhouse last year. Out in the steaming jungle and I cooking what I sap.
But by the late 1960s and early 70s, their imagined suburban utopia was a social experiment that had gone badly wrong.
40,000 people live here. They have no public toilets, no banks, theatres or cinemas. There isn't a dance hall in Easterhouse or a restaurant, a community centre, or even a place to collect the dough.
The displaced population struggled with unemployment, gang culture, and crime became rampant.
Everybody's flitted out to Easterhouse last year. Everybody in the world has flitted out to here.
The older I got, the gangs were there, and you join the gang. When I go back to Easterhouse, I still get called a skinhead boy. Right? People say that, and I've still got a nickname, and my nickname is Jinky. And when I go back to Easterhouse, I'm Jinky Man for skinheads. Even though I'm 50, I'm still Jinky for skinheads. I love the gangs. I loved it. I loved the gang fighting. I loved being part of a gang and And it was all about moving out your header. You couldn't move out your header in Easter House. If you did go anywhere, you had to take 10-handed.
The very structure of the estate helps the gangs to enforce the strictest code of all, that boundary lines are sacred and you cross them at your own risk. The playing field separates drummy land from the den toy territory. A road marks the dividing line between packland and the den toy.
That was your territory, and you guarded that territory. Doesn't matter where you went, even if you were going to a dentist, if your dentist was in another part of Easter, just say aggro. You had to take your pals with you, because you couldn't go to that place yourself.
By 1975, over 120,000 people had been moved into the schemes, and 95,000 homes had been demolished. But the corporation was running out of money. Despite this, it was still pressing ahead with demolishing the city's tenements. Vast swathes of Glasgow were now wasteland. In 1975, the corporation's bulldozers were heading for Duke Street. Irene McInnes was 19 when she settled into her tenement flat off Duke Street.
This was our first flat. This is where I got married into Bathgate Street, the top flat up there. We bought the house in November 1966 and we moved in on the 9th of June 1967, the day we got married. You weren't allowed to stay with anyone in my day before that, so we moved in on our wedding day. It was 2 bedrooms and an inside toilet. And we were very posh because there's not a lot of people at that time bought their houses or bought their flats. And Tom and I were delighted. But unfortunately, we could only live in the living room and the bedroom because we couldn't afford the furniture.
Duke Street was still a thriving and bustling street at this time. But nevertheless, its tenements were scheduled for demolition or comprehensive redevelopment.
We got a notice through the door, public meeting called Thompson Street School, this school here, for everybody, every tenant or owner to come and hear what this meeting was about. It would be something to your interest. There's threat, big threat. I think they had that in big, right. Big threat.
Knock them down.
And they would tell us all about how they wanted the whole south side of Duke Street to be demolished. Harriet was sitting with her neighbour, John Butterley.
The night time. He was quite calm at the beginning, and then later on, when the guy said, we're pulling down the houses in your area, and probably most of you will be sent to Easter House. Mr. Butterley did get up in arms, didn't he?
He did.
And he said to the man, you go and live in Easter House if you like, but I certainly am not.
Excuse me, use it.
Use the proper language. I will not use the language John used.
It's colourful language all the time. It didn't matter who he spoke to.
I remember a lot of shouting and bawling. And it was basically like, it was no, that's not happening.
Easter House lies 5 miles away from Duke Street. Back in the 70s, there were no regular bus routes there.
That time in the 70s, Easter House was very much a distant land. It was miles away as far as we were concerned.
The scheme's got a bad name, especially Easter House. There was a way back then.
This could have been us because these houses are over 30 years old, and they must be.
What do you think of these wee verandas, though, Irene? They're so small, aren't they, really?
There isn't much you could get in them. No. Maybe one chair and that'd be it.
One chair, maybe, and sit on them. Because they're family houses, you know.
But the stuff they were offering us way back then,
yeah.
Look at it.
Well, they couldn't have been very well built when they're coming down already, I don't think. There was a lot of gangs in Easter House, and it really did frighten people to come and live here. I certainly didn't want to come and live in Easter House. It was very scary stuff, you know.
John Bartley's reluctance to be moved out to Easter House struck a chord with many at that meeting. They decided to take on the authorities.
What motivated him was basically people were telling him what he was to do and when he was to do it, and you'll just accept this. And he's like, well, no, you're wrong, so I'm not accepting it.
They were mostly from Bathgate Street. John Butterley, Irene McInnes.
I lived up in 64, We had John Butterley and Cathy McFarlane was in 59. We had Harriet in 47.
Harriet the nuisance.
We had Isabel Allen.
Jimmy Donaldson.
And when we all got together, we made things happen.
So people in the area thought, well, that's the Bathgate Street Mafia, you know.
And their boss was John Butterley. The idea was to create a resident-run organisation from scratch, which would purchase and then renovate their own properties.
Yeah, it was unheard of. Nobody knew what it was. I mean, it was. I don't know where the initial idea came from, but no, it was very new, especially in Glasgow.
The residents faced two big problems. First, to try and persuade a reluctant Glasgow Corporation that the residents knew better. Second, to persuade all their neighbours to join them.
The houses were in disrepair. There's no doubt about that. The houses were in disrepair. People couldn't afford the upkeep of them. They couldn't afford the maintenance of them. You had landlords who weren't interested in doing anything with them. Just as long as they were getting their rent, they weren't interested.
The corporation thought they were unmaintainable. They thought they were at their end of their life. He disagreed with that. He thought that they just needed a bit of TLC, they just needed a bit of love, they needed a bit of money spent on them, whereas they just thought the easy solution was just to knock them down.
For a year, the Bathgate Street Mafia kept pushing, petitioning and arguing. Finally, Glasgow Corporation recognised a group of enthusiastic amateurs with no previous experience as a legitimate housing association.
I think he finally won by basically grinding them down and just by basically being persistent and saying no every single time. No, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it, and no listening to what their proposals were. He had a community, and he was determined 100% to save it.
Reedvale became one of the very first community-based housing associations in Glasgow. And this immediately gave them access to central government grants of millions of pounds. They now needed to persuade all their neighbours to entrust them with their homes and see what they could achieve.
How people trusted us, I don't know. How we trusted ourselves at that time, because we didn't know what we were doing.
In spring 1976, local builders and contractors set to work.
The community ran it. The community were the people who were in charge. They looked after it. They made the decisions. It wasn't the Glasgow City Council who sat in their ivory white towers. It was the people within the houses themselves who decided what was going to happen. They decided what colour the bathroom suites were getting in. They decided what colour the closes were getting painted. So it was always to do with the community. It was always to do with that.
We did one flat up at 93 Reedvale Street there, showed them what it was like, and it was just a refurbishment, wasn't it?
Of course.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Great,
oh, this is great.
But it was
oh,
great.
Oh, I wouldn't mind a house like this. Oh, it's got an inside toilet. Oh, look at that beautiful bathroom. Oh, it's lovely. So that was a starting. One flat was a start.
Very exciting, yeah.
Some did move away. Some did accept rehousing in the schemes. But those that stayed joined the association and watched as their neighbourhood began its transformation. And a century of coal and grime was washed away.
There was a lot of people getting involved within the committee. People wanted to help, people wanted to volunteer, people wanted to be a part of this, because I think after a while people realised this is starting to become something real. This isn't just some wee guy with a bonnet shouting his mouth off. This is becoming something real.
This is Reedvale Housing Association, Glasgow Housing Association. What would you rather have?
John Mallon had no choice. His family needed more room, so the corporation rehoused them in the new high-rises that now overshadow Duke Street. They were built on the foundations of the tenements where John had lived as a boy.
I stayed here for 14 years. Still a dump. There's a dump on this side here. But a lot of good memories about here. A lot of good people, a lot of good neighbours who looked after us all. We used to have fun meeting everybody in these lifts. But not today, they're broke again. This is the back stairs.
When built back in 1968, the White Vale and Blue Vale towers symbolised the pinnacle of Glasgow's bold vision. Soaring 30 stories high and each containing 174 flats, they were the tallest occupied buildings in Scotland.
You just have to walk all the way up to the top, 26. These flats are quite notorious, but the biggest majority of people that stayed here were really good, honest citizens.
What level are we at now?
I've lost count. Oh, right. I've lost count. I think it's the next one. The one time you didn't need to leave the flats. You could buy your drink here. You could buy cheap vodka here. You could buy cheap champagne up these flats. Buy drugs up the flats. Buy tobacco up the flats. Buy butcher meat. There were a butcher. Used to buy half a cow. Used to chop butcher meat up. You could buy a butcher parcel for a £5. You know what I mean? So that community kind of was there, but raw. You know what I mean? And all the meters were rigged. But the white meter heating they had was too. We couldn't run it. It was costing £20–25 to heat a one-bedroom house. Nobody could heat their houses. So there was a spark that stayed up here and rigged all the meters. You know what I mean? And we were all toasted. This is my old bit here. This is my old landing. This is Maltus. I've not been in here for over 20 years. This is the room. Didn't realise how so small it was. There's the living room. This is where the parties had. Used to sit here and get full of it. Constant. Drink, drugs, everything. And that's a kitchen that very rarely you get made food in. Pot noodles. We lived in pot noodles. They called us the pot noodle gang when I stayed here, because we lived in pot noodles. Drink, drugs and pot noodles. Don't know how I'm still alive, to tell you the truth. I could walk out the door and get full of Valium, cannabis, acid, heroin, cocaine, Mogadon, Tramadol. We didn't know the risks. We thought we seen it on the telly, basically, watching Starsky and Hutch. But drugs everywhere, you know what I mean? It was easy to buy a bag of smack, there was a bag of toys. It was quicker to buy a bag of smack than a bag of toys, you know what I mean? Miners were on strike. Thatcher was shutting everything down. The anarchy, everybody was wanting to run a riot. There was no jobs, we just wanted to smash the government up. And then all of a sudden heroin appeared. And everybody started taking it. And it quelled, you know what I mean? It quelled the uprising. I feel it was the government, but put it this way, the Tories are back again and what's the place full of again, heroin.
This is Britain, I'm Britain, this free and promised land.
In the 1980s, Duke Street, like the rest of Glasgow, was hit by the economic downturn that was to engulf Scotland and the north. With mass unemployment came social deprivation in the form of alcohol and drug addiction. Duke Street was in the thick of it as Glasgow's reputation blackened. The life expectancy of a man living in the most deprived areas of Glasgow was a full 15 years less than one living in the city's more affluent districts. What was left of Denniston's middle classes on the north side of Duke Street now fled the East End. As families moved away, so the grand houses became bedsits, halfway houses, and hostels. During this period, Reed Vale was also undergoing a period of change. Families were still leaving the area. They had also been forced to demolish some buildings deemed to be unsafe. The remaining tenements were all covered in scaffolding. But then, the scaffolding began to come off as the first flats were completed.
This is my mum's house. This is where I was brought up when I was a kid. Hopefully she hears me.
John Stewart moved into a newly renovated Reed Vale flat when he was 10.
And they were all new inside, new doors, new toilets, new kitchens, just everything was new inside. And it smelled brilliant, it smelled like a really new house, you know. Yeah, my old room there. This was my old room, this is where I slept. It's now used as a storeroom. This is our kitchen. It's never really changed except for the new cupboards. I remember when I was younger, me and my brother were standing here and we were fighting. He pushed me and I actually went right through the window and landed out the back. You can just imagine falling for there as a kid. Luckily hitting the grass. If I had hit the brick, I would have been in hospital.
John Stewart attended the local primary school at the end of his street. It served those living on the south of Duke Street.
This here is Thompson Street Primary School where I went in primary. I was in here for primary 6, primary 7 and stuff. And this here is the playground area where you can see the clothesline. This is where the playground area was. A lot of people knew this as the bike shed area, but that wall, it's never ever changed. But it was a great school. It was absolutely brilliant. And I always remember the headmistress. Her office was in there because I was never out it. It's just one of those things. But it's a great old building.
Thompson Street School was built in 1875. Its fees were 4 times higher than other local schools. Such was its reputation. It initially appealed to the elite of Denniston on the other side of the street before becoming a free school in 1890. By 1984, it was educating Duke Street's south side.
It's got a lot of memories. I think the memories were the thing for me. My life started when I moved into that school. The first couple of days I came to the school, I saw this boy, shocking blonde hair, and thought, he's nice. And I went home and said to my mum, I've met the boy I'm going to marry. And she just looked at me and went, so you have, dear, and just left it. But 10 years later, I married that man.
But the number of families in Duke Street was in sharp decline. In 1983, the council decided to close half of the schools in the area. Duke Street's parents and children campaigned to save their school. Irene led the protest.
As a parent, our first responsibility is to the safety of our children, and under no circumstance are we going to allow the council to put us in a position, and our children in a very dangerous position. We're sitting in the middle of a community where we are surrounded by 4 main roads, and no matter what school they propose to send us to, our children are going to face very dangerous hazards.
Yet again, the council was coming in. Other people were making decisions for us.
It's about time they sat up and listened to the people from the area and realised our children come first.
There was a big march. We left from here and we'd done a march right all the way around past Glasgow Cathedral and came back down High Street and John Knox Street, all in protest at the fact that they're closing this school down.
Hundreds of parents and children gathered outside Strathclyde Region's headquarters before the meeting. The children wore plain white masks because, say their parents, they're being treated as faceless people.
I remember it very well because it was filmed with a TV and it was the first time I was ever on TV. So I'll never ever forget that, and my face was in the picture in the paper as well, you know.
Despite winning a temporary stay of execution, the school finally closed its doors in June 1984.
I was one of the last primary 7 pupils in Thompson Street Primary.
It seemed it was another building that would chart Duke Street's sad decline. But John Butterley and the rest of the Bathgate Street Mafia had other plans. After a century of grime and filth, stone cleaning revealed row upon row of glistening honey-coloured tenements. Reedvale Housing Association was transforming the area.
Then you get impatient waiting and yours to get done, you know. And Bathgate Street was one of the last, really. You know.
We were the Bathgate Street Mafia, we were last to get renovated.
We'd done all the work, but we were last to get renovated.
Harriet moved back into what had been her one-room and kitchen flat.
Here we are, after this being the small flat, Reedvale came and knocked 2 flats into one, so now we've got this nice big flat that I'd like to come along and see it. And this was the flat next door, and this used to be the kitchen in the flat next door, which is now a lovely bedroom. So that was 2 bedrooms now we've got in the flat. This used to be a cupboard, and now we have a bathroom, which was a nice luxury when we moved into this flat. This was a sitting room. This whole part here was a sitting room, but they divided it into 2, and now we have a small single bedroom in here, which gives you 3 bedrooms. And next door, we got a nice kitchen, which even takes a table and chairs, so it's a big enough kitchen for a family. So this was the sitting room of the house next door, and now it's a nice kitchen. Personally, I felt moving from a small roomy kitchen, toilet, into a 3-bedroom, bathroom, kitchen house was, to me, absolutely brilliant. It was like moving into a mansion.
This 3-bedroomed flat is now rented from Reedvale by her daughter, Vicky.
Vicky's twin brother lives just straight across the road. You can see his window from here, so they can actually always talk to each other. My other daughter lives in Thompson Street, so she's not far away either. So,
as the residents of the south side moved back into their refurbished and now desirable homes, so this was influencing the whole of Duke Street, and the north side was changing too.
Okay, everyone, thanks for coming along today. I know it's a holiday weekend, so it's even better that people have turned up. Jerry, you'll be doing Craig Park, we do Wester Craigs, and then we kind of congregate down at the, and you're doing the square. Okay? Thanks, cheers. Brian. Have a good day.
So I've been here since 2005 in this street, having lived in the West End of Glasgow for 18 years before that. And by selling an apartment in the West End of Glasgow, one can afford, or one could afford, to buy a house in this street with as much space, if not more, and gardens front and back.
Now that's the rubbish from the gloves. The whole of East End is now becoming a far better place to be. When they asked you what you did, and you know, I said I was an architect and we stayed in Denison, and they were puzzled by this because they had never heard of Denison. They thought all architects stayed in the West End. Now everyone's heard of Denison.
We're very pleased with the way that this area exists, and there is a certain kind of community. You know, if you can at least spend a little bit of time once a month picking up a sweet wrapper or 2, then, you know, you do your bit.
It's just really a community feel now. People feel that they're supported and that there's a sense of place where they are. Morning. So it's that kind of thing that you continue to talk about it. People begin to learn about it. We were just lucky we got in early doors, and we love it to bits. And that's it, isn't it? Yeah.
Slowly, the middle classes are making their way back to Duke Street. A sense of community is returning to this street. But no one wants to live in these flats anymore. The last tenants moved out over a year ago, and 378 homes lie empty. Built too close to the railway line and the homes that sit underneath, they can't be blown up. Instead, they still await demolition, one floor at a time.
The school lay for a while, with nothing happening to it. And it was angering us all. They were saying it was going to cost £50,000 to demolish it. So we said to them, we'll take it off your hands. What do you want for it? And they went, well, we can give you it for £1.
Irene couldn't save the school, but Reedvale Housing Association did save the building. It became 19 flats. Irene moved here in 1987.
This is the main entrance of the old school, and if you just come through, I'll show you the living area. This is the living room and the kitchen area. This used to be the headmaster's room, and my husband told me visited it more often than I did for the belt. This is the bedroom. This was a classroom. Got a staff room for the teachers. When we moved in here, this was John Butterley wanted a jacuzzi. I've got a jacuzzi. See, John, he'll be looking down for me from above. I've got a jacuzzi at last. We are independent and we make the decisions. The people of the area, it's people power. The City Council, known as Glasgow Housing Association now, are following in our footsteps. Why? Because we were successful.
Not so long ago, Harriet moved into Reedvale's very last project. Sheltered housing for Duke Street's elderly.
That was 7 years ago, and then I felt quite young, and I thought, I'm not going to among all the old folk. This is where we sit in the summer. We bring the chairs over and we sit. We're waiting on a new umbrella coming for the table. And that's our love seat, but nobody's in love in here, so it doesn't get used. And there was one man stood up when he seen me and he went, "Oh, fresh meat," and rubbed his hands. And I thought, oh my God.
John Butterley was awarded an MBE in 1987 for his services to the community.
I remember going to a Celtic match with him that day, and it must have been the Rangers-Celtic game because it was a New Year's Day game, and there was a guy in front of us with his paper rolled up in his back pocket, and I could see his son with him kind of looking at his back pocket and then looking at my grandpa and then looking at the back pocket, and I kind of felt my grandpa's famous, you know. It was brilliant, and I know he loved it. He absolutely loved being on the front page of the Daily Record.
The residents of Duke Street were able to save 1,000 homes, and no one was moved more than a few hundred metres from where they'd previously lived. It was the Reedvale tenants of Glasgow's Duke Street who pioneered the creation of community-controlled housing associations throughout the United Kingdom. In next week's episode, Aberdeen's Fitty Squares were an enclave for fisherfolk.
You were being taught at an early age that the demon drink was bad for you.
Unchanged for generations.
Fitty was regarded as kind of a strange place.
When a new industry arrived, its people were thrown headlong into the modern world.
These people have been sacrificed to oil interests.
If you want to learn more about social change and issues such as poverty, class and housing, the Open University has produced a free publication. Go to bbc.co.uk/ourstreets and follow the links to the Open University or call 0845 271 0018.
His words and beliefs have shaped rebellions and terrified the ruling classes for centuries. Melvyn Bragg's Radical Lives goes in search of John Ball tomorrow at 9. We're off to the Commonwealth Games next tonight on BBC Two, picking up the action at the end of day 9.